evening, everyone. Welcome to Clifton House. We're here in this beautiful building to commemorate 251st birthday of Mary Ann McCracken, and to tell the tale of two women. One is Mary Ann McCracken, and the other, who's with us this evening, is Baroness May Blood. Now, before I introduce the speakers to you formally, just a few words. First of all, everyone will be muted during the talk. There's a chat function on the system. If you want to ask a question, please feel free to do so. Please use the chat facility, and I will share the questions at the conclusion of our talk. And there is, if you could click on the speaker view on your screen, then you'll be able to follow the two speakers. So first of all, a word about the Belfast Charitable Society. It was founded in 1752 in Belfast, and it's the oldest charitable society in Belfast. Mary Ann McCracken and her family had very considerable links with the society. This building that we're in earlier today was describing as a jewel, but it is really hidden in plain sight. Many people in Belfast do not know that this building exists, and it's quite near the cathedral. And if you haven't had the opportunity to visit it, and time permits, and the opportunity arises when the COVID restrictions are limited, I recommend a visit. It's a glorious Georgian building. And Mary Ann visited this room many times. I'm afraid there isn't a picture of her in the room, save for this representation, which you see behind me here, recommending your attention to the Mary Ann McCracken Foundation. Now, as I say, today we're holding this event because it's her birthday, and she was born 251 years ago today. She was a remarkable woman, and she campaigned for women and children who were then housed in this society. She was concerned about working conditions, about apprenticeships, about education, about health and welfare, and many other important social issues of the day. And in order to commemorate that remarkable woman, we in the society have formed the Mary Ann McCracken Foundation, and it's led by the distinguished lady on my left, Norma Sint. We have undertaken a number of things since the foundation was formed. One of them is to republish a biography of Mary Ann McCracken. It was written by Mary McNeil, who's a former board member. One is the book, which of course I'm holding up to you because I'm hoping that those of you who haven't bought a copy will now do so, and it would be a great present for your partner's next birthday. So please buy a copy. All the funds, of course, are going to the causes that the society supports. We've also produced a walking tour map of Belfast, and it indicates many of the sites associated with Mary Ann McCracken, which you can visit around the Belfast city centre. We also, earlier this afternoon, had our inaugural walking tour, and I think it was a great success. We heard the history of Mary Ann and the history of the society, something about her life and work, and some of the places that she was associated with. And it began here in Clifton House and ended at the City Hall, so it's quite a short area covered by it. We've also, for example, had a previous lecture by David Olusoga, the historian, and he talked about slavery generally, the impact that that had in relation to various situations, and he looked at the history of Belfast and the Charitable Society, which of course has a mixed history, because there were some people associated with the society who were involved with the slave trade, and there were some people associated with the society who were in opposition to it. And Mary Ann McCracken was one of those in opposition. So tonight, I hope and I'm sure that we will have equally challenging and thought-provoking comments made by our guest speakers, because we're moving from one great social reformer of earlier days to a great social reformer of today. That's May Blood, of course. But before introducing May, I'd like to turn to Norma Sint, who is the chair of the Mary Ann McCracken Foundation. And she's going to say a few words about Mary Ann and about the foundation. Now, Norma was formerly at Queen's University as Director of Development and Alumni Relations. She joined Queen's in 2000 and she was appointed as Director in 2008. And she also managed two other important roles there and on voluntary boards. One was the Queen's Foundation, the other was the Friends of the Queen's USA. And as I say, she's currently the chair of the Mary Ann McCracken Foundation. And I'd like to pass over now to Norma to say a few words about the work of the foundation.
Thank you, Ronnie. Well, we're meeting here tonight on what would have been Mary Ann's 251st birthday. And she was born to Captain John McCracken and his wife, Anne Joy, and her campaign for social justice started at a very young age. In her letters, she describes visiting the poorhouse when she was really young. In fact, she remembers just when she had learned to walk. And at the age of 6, she was actually making clothes for the children who lived in the poorhouse. But to Mary Ann, the charitable society who ran the poorhouse was a family institution. Her uncles, Henry and Robert Joy, had key roles in fundraising and designing the building, and her father and some of her male siblings were board members at various times. Mary Ann grew to become an abolitionist, a philanthropist, and a social reformer. She lived for 96 years, quite unusual in those days, and her life encompassed some of the most turbulent periods of Irish history. And she dedicated her life to the disadvantaged at home and abroad. So tonight we're looking at things that Mary Ann fought for or fought against. And first thing that she fought against was child poverty. One of her principal campaigns was tackling child poverty. And from her earliest years, making clothes for the children, she was involved in the society throughout her life. She created the Ladies' Committee in 1827 and remained a leading light throughout its existence until it came to an end when she was 81 years old and the only regular attender. She took a holistic approach to tackling poverty with the support of the Ladies' Committee of the poorhouse. She fought for an improved diet for the children, instituted a reward-based structure for children based on her own enlightened education under David Manson. She was passionate about cleanliness and secured small victories for the children that mounted up, including more soap, blinds in the children's hospital ward, and play equipment within the grounds of the poorhouse. Mary Ann fought for children through all means open to her in what was a very restrictive, male-dominated society, from the formal institution of the poorhouse to her personal philanthropic activities, including her role in helping to stop the practice of climbing boys being used by chimney sweeps. Second thing she fought for was education and access to education for everyone. She had a deep passion for education. She understood its value. Alongside her brother Henry Joy, she set up a Sunday school to teach the poor children of Belfast together. Maybe that was the first integrated school in the town. Within the poorhouse, she championed the idea of a nursery school, and she was refused permission twice by the men's committee. So she went ahead and set it up regardless. And as we women all know, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than ask for permission. She helped to expand the curriculum for the poorhouse children, so they weren't only learning maths and English, but she learned about music, about geography. And she gave these children a childhood by taking them on field trips to the Belfast Museum, to Donaghadee and to Bangor, looking after their physical health with marching and sea bathing. And outside of her work in the poorhouse, Mary Ann was involved in other educational endeavours, including the Lancastrian School and the Ladies' Industrial School. She also fought for breaking cycles of poverty. She viewed education as the foundation of a child's development, but she knew that they needed to be trained in a trade or a craft in order to break that cycle of poverty. This took many forms for her, beginning with the basics of allowing the younger children to go out with older role models to see how to behave, to do errands, and an everyday life outside the walls of the poorhouse. The poorhouse ran an apprenticeship scheme for the children in its care, and Mary Ann pushed for safe apprenticeship placements, organised a series of checks for those taking on the children. She also fought for, and unsurprisingly got her way, with the introduction of probation periods for apprentices, where they could go out on a trial basis to see if the role was suitable for them, knowing that this was key to empowering these children for life beyond the poorhouse. And even when they were formally educated, the Ladies' Committee, in cooperation with its male counterpart, introduced unannounced welfare visits to ensure that the needs of the children were being met. Mary Ann also wanted to empower women to help themselves and to help others. She fought for the empowerment of women. As a stalwart of the Ladies' Committee, she encouraged other women to get involved and influence the running of the poorhouse. She pushed for young girls with promise to receive additional training in Belfast, including one called Helena Kelly. She was a poorhouse child who actually became the nursery school teacher, and she was granted permission to attend schools in the town to learn how to teach. She was a great believer in individualism, and on one occasion, she and the Ladies' Committee refused to apprentice a lame girl as a servant because she knew that she required a sedentary occupation such as a dressmaker. Mary Ann, with her sister Margaret, also set up a muslin factory, employing local women, and even during times of recession, she refused to let her staff go because she knew the hardships that they would face. Mary Ann was also an abolitionist and a philanthropist. It was not only the disadvantaged at home that Mary Ann fought for. Unlike a number of other figures in history, including the infamous Waddell Cunningham, Mary Ann was a lifelong abolitionist who fought for the rights of enslaved people. She refused to eat sugar or molasses because it was produced by slave labour. She subscribed to one of her uncle's ethos that if you partake of slave produce, then you are an accessory to the guilt. She was involved in anti-slavery societies in Belfast, helped to raise money for the abolitionist cause in America. And one of the most memorable accounts of Mary Ann's abolitionist activity comes direct from her letters. It's of her within a few weeks of her 89th birthday, standing at the docks in Belfast, handing out anti-slavery leaflets to immigrants who were boarding ships for America. And she lived to see the end of slavery in America in 1865, passing away the following year. We can only surmise that Mary Ann, Waddell Cunningham, and others like Valentine Jones probably met in Clifton House many times and crossed paths in the stairs. If such meetings occurred, I think we can presume that Mary Ann would have made her feelings known on their differences in who they treated and how they treated other human beings. Throughout her 96 years, Mary Ann dedicated her life to the disadvantaged at both home and abroad. She was motivated by social justice and tried to make the world a better place. She was always in the move, and it has been remarked that if she stood still for any period of time, a committee would form around her for one cause or another. But she never sought the limelight. In one of her letters, she reminds us that those who endeavour to serve the public ought always to have some better motive than the love of fame, which is so precarious that the same man the public would exalt to the skies today, they will perhaps tomorrow transfer to the dust. How very apt that is for the times we live in today. Today, the Mary Ann McCracken Foundation seeks to keep her legacy alive and to explore her relevance today. The foundation has brought her story to a new audience, as Sir Ronnie said, through a new edition of Mary Ann's biography. We've printed a map and developed a new walking tour, and the first one was today, to allow people to follow in the footsteps of this remarkable woman. We're also working on projects related to themes that Mary Ann championed, including educational disadvantage, the role of women in society, and modern day slavery. and we're keen to hear your opinions on the future work of the Foundation during tonight's Q&A session. Mary Ann was a remarkable woman who inspired many people in her lifetime to get involved and to carry out philanthropic works. I think she'd have been very pleased with us as her foundation for hosting Baroness May Blood this evening, another woman who's making history, sharing many of the same passions with Mary Ann around education, industry, and addressing disadvantage. And I want to finish with another quote from Mary Ann herself, written when she was 27, and one that I think remains timeless. I hope the present era will produce some woman of sufficient talent to inspire the rest with a genuine love of liberty, to show an example of candour, generosity and justice superior to any that have gone before.
Well, thank you, Norma. Thank you for capturing the energy and variety of interests of Mary Ann McCracken through those words. Now, the world of 1821 was very different to the world of 2021, but both worlds share disadvantage and exclusion. And both worlds have produced their champions of those who are disadvantaged and those who are excluded. We've heard about Mary Ann in the 1821, and the champion in the modern world is May Blood. Baroness Blood worked in the linen mills in Belfast for more than 30 years. And in 1996, she was awarded an MBE for her work in labour relations. She has also, throughout her life, been committed to integrated education and indeed to many other causes. In 1999, she became the first Northern Ireland woman to be given a life peerage. In 2006, Baroness Blood was voted the BBC Northern Ireland Woman of the Year. She holds honorary doctorates from the University of Ulster, the Open University, and Queen's University in Belfast, fitting recognition of her significant contribution to our society. So I'd now ask Baroness May Blood to say some few words about Mary Ann McCracken and her life today in Belfast.
Thank you very much, Ronnie. And I noticed on the screen quite a few friends who probably have heard my story before. And I apologise, but I've only one life. And it's the only one I can talk about. But what a life. I was born into what today would be known as a poor family. I was born in off Roden Street, just beside where the M2 is now, and where the West Link is. And I was born into a family of 7, and mum and dad, 9 of us. We lived in a little 2-up, 2-down house, appalling living conditions. I was speaking to someone the other day, and they were referring to some of the recent television that has been on about the homes around London and different parts of England where the houses are just dreadful and where everything's growing on the walls. And it took me back when the house I was born in was like that. We used to think they were mushrooms, and we wondered why we didn't eat them. I was born into, as I say, but we were born into, by today's terms, a poor family. But I have to tell you, we didn't know we were poor because everybody around us was the same. And I had the advantage of being born into a mixed area. I mean, by Protestant and Catholic. Our next door neighbours were Catholic, as was many of folk around us. And we were just that little village that got on with life. I went to school. I passed the dreaded 11 plus. We hear so much about today's selection process. I wanted to be a school teacher. I don't know why, because I hated school. Absolutely hated it. And I often say when I'm out speaking to young people, I had the greatest relationship ever with the headmaster. I seen him every day in the week because I was generally in detention. I grew up like that. I grew up and I wasted my education. I absolutely wasted. I passed the 11 plus. Unfortunately, my mother and father couldn't afford school uniforms and things like that. So you just got on with life. I just couldn't wait till I got out through the gate for the last time. And fortnight before I left school, and many of you have heard me saying this before, fortnight before I left school, the assistant principal sent for me and she said to me, "You're a hussy and you'll never be anything else, only a hussy." And you know, I had no idea what a hussy was. I ran all the way home. I thought it was a compliment. And of course, when I got home, it was a different story. But if that woman meant I was a troublemaker, I suppose she'd got it in one, because I've been a troublemaker all my life. The only way I've ever understood to be recognised somewhere is to make a bit of trouble, even when I was in the trade union movement. But I went to school, I wasted that time at school, and I now know all these years later the loss of that education. And that's why when I'm out and I speak at quite a few schools, quite a few prize givings, I always say education is the most important thing we can give a child, because it is their passport to the world. Whatever stage that education's at, we should encourage it. And that's one of the things with Mary Ann that we have in common, that we both see the value of education for young people. But as I say, I left school, and when I left school, I went to work in the mill, which is what most girls of my age would have done with no education behind them. I went to work in the mill, and my mother got me a job in an office, which was social mobility in those days. But when the job in the office came up, I stayed on in the mill. I loved the mill. And anybody who's ever worked in a linen mill will tell you the same thing. It was hard work, very, very poor conditions, and certainly weren't there for the money. But it was a community within a community, and I like to think in many ways that sort of honed my character for the rest of my life. I worked in the mill for 38 years. And one of the good things about getting into the mill was I got to join the trade union movement. And my father was a great trade unionist. He worked in the shipyard. His nickname in the shipyard was Red Billy. So that'll give you an idea of what his politics were. And it was drummed into us at home about the trade union movement. When I went into the mill, I got strict instructions from my father that I was not to join the trade union. That was strange, because he was an ardent trade unionist. But my father believed that the trade union were only for men. Women didn't do that sort of thing, and certainly not one of his daughters. But when I went into the mill, I was asked to join. I joined. It was only a shilling or 5 pence as we now know it, and I reckoned I could join, and my dad didn't need to know it, and I wasn't going to be the odd one out. It was the best thing I ever done, because when I was 19, the Transport and General Workers Union offered me the opportunity to become a shop steward and to get educated. At that time, the law just came out that you were allowed to go and study. You were allowed a day off work, paid, to study, and I'd done all my studying just not too far from here. And it was fascinating for me. I learned so much during that time. First of all, I learned what I had wasted in education, and it was playing catch up all my life. But I got involved in the trade union movement, got involved in trying to raise wages, trying to do all the things. I mean, the conditions in the mill were appalling. And I was thinking back the other night, a woman then who had a baby within 2 days was expected to be back at her place of work. And we worked in really, really poor conditions. And we used to cover for the woman, because most of the women that I worked with lived locally to the mill. And we used to cover for her, to let her out to breastfeed the child and back in again. And if the boss came looking for her, the one way we got rid of him was we used to say, "She's a touch of women's troubles." And he disappeared. So we used that quite regularly. But that's the way conditions were. But you know, working in the mill was a community within a community. Once you went through that gate, you had only one enemy, and that was the man in the white coat. Protestant and Catholic didn't matter. Didn't matter what you had, we all gave each other. We used to, if anybody was in a bit of debt or a bit of trouble, we used to have a whip around and lift money and try and help each other that way. And so within the trade union movement, I learned how to negotiate. I learned how to express myself. People can't believe it, but at one time I was very shy. I wouldn't have spoke. I wouldn't have said booty a goose. Then I discovered if I didn't use my voice, nobody else was going to use it for me. And I discovered I would have to speak up for myself. And as I travel among many women today, I find that that problem's still there, but we're getting there. But as I say, I went to work in the mill. I was in the mill when the Troubles broke out. And where I lived in Off-Roden Street was the epicentre of the Troubles. It actually started there just not too far from the Falls Road. And we went through the most horrendous 2 years. We tried to hold the mixed community together, but it wasn't possible. And I often say, people say, well, why did you all move out? I often say, you had to be there. You could have touched the field. The idea that going round was they were coming in to shoot all the Protestants and take all the Catholics out and vice versa. Now, none of that was true. Communities started to barricade themselves in the street. So every morning I went to the mill, I had to climb over the barricades, go up the hospital hill, as we called it, into work, back down and climb over the barricades again. And so it was, but it was an interesting thing, you know, at that time, many of the women I worked with, the men I worked with was predominantly Catholic. It was only about 25% Protestant. And many women I came home with and went to work every morning with were Catholic. When the Troubles really struck and Catholic communities in off the Grosvenor Road started to barricade themselves in, and now when I look at some of the old footage that we see regularly on TV, it brings it all back. But on a Saturday morning, I organised a couple of women to go up to the barricades of the Catholic community, and they would have given us money and their note of messages. And we went down the Grosvenor Road, done all their shopping, came back up and handed it over the barricade. That's how divided we were. But then we were women and we knew the value of working together. And so my years in the mill, I have to say, I know it was hard work. We changed the conditions. We changed a lot of things, not to the extent I would have liked them changed, but we changed a lot of things. I worked in a mill with 450 workers and we didn't even have a first aid. We didn't even have a canteen. We had more rats than we had anything else. And someone once asked me, I was at a function like this, and someone said, what about health and safety? I said, health and safety was 2 words in the dictionary. They definitely weren't on the mill floor, and that's quite true. I mean, I had one of my workers lost her arm in a machine, and we hadn't even the facility to do anything about it. We had to rush her over to the Royal, because my company, believed because we were so near the Royal Victoria Hospital, we really didn't need a first aid. We could cross to the hospital anytime, and you know, we did quite a bit. But my years in the mill taught me a whole lot of things. It taught me about people, it taught me about the value of real friendship. It taught me about getting women to stand up for themselves. Yes, we had a lot of domestic violence and we have a lot today, but in those days, if someone came in with a black eye, about 20 of us was going up to make sure he wouldn't do it again. You know, that was the rate of being comrades together. And when the Troubles broke out, it was devastating, because all of a sudden you seen a change in the community. First couple of years wasn't too bad. We seen women marrying soldiers, and then we came down the road, they weren't allowed to speak to the British Army, and they were taken out and they were tarred and feathered and all that. And we went through all that with women, trying to get women some support and trying to hold on to them. But my years also in the Troubles taught me that what I'd learned through the trade union movement, that I could speak up for people. We could begin to talk to people. Now, it was a very long, hard road, and I have to say, the 80s was really, really tough. My brothers and sisters had all married. I was the only one left at home. And, you know, I'm very often asked why I never married. And I said, the reason's really quite simple. God gave my brothers and sisters husbands and wives. He gave me a brain. Which is not strictly true, and I have to say, my sisters weren't happy about that, but that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. When my mother and father and I, we were burned out of our home by Protestants because we chose to defend our Catholic neighbours. It wasn't the fact that they were Catholic. It was the fact that we're an ordinary family just like us, trying to live every day and rear their family. And my dad and me, we took a stand, and unfortunately, fortunately for me, my mother and father were away on holiday up in Newcastle, and they set fire to the house. And so we had to move. We couldn't get a house anywhere. You know, I have to sometimes think about, you know, there was discrimination in housing towards Catholics, but there was also discrimination against working Protestants. We couldn't get anywhere. We were told we had no points, even though my father had fought in 2 world wars. And the only way we could get out of it was because at that time I had very severe asthma. And we were told we would have to, we were living in the most appalling conditions before they decided to break all the windows and bring the ceilings down. And eventually, we couldn't get a house anywhere. And my mother was a great friend of Johnny McQuaid's, who used to be a councillor on the Shankill. And he said, I can't get you a house. But he says, there are building new houses at the top of Springfield Road. Why don't you go up and squat? And that's how we actually moved to Spring Martin. Now, I have to tell you, the jolt to my system, moving out of a mixed area into a loyalist ghetto, you couldn't imagine. When we moved into Spring Martin, we had the UDA and the UVA both in it, and we didn't need to go over the peace wall to have troubles We had troubles in the estate every night. And then we decided that enough was enough. And we got a group of women together. We had a committee of 13. We had 12 women and 1 man. And the interesting thing about the man was, I've been often asked, why would 1 man? It was really quite simple. He was the only one we knew could use a computer. And he's the only one we knew could write half-decent letters. And so he was incorporated into and we used to meet in each other's houses. We had a list of what we wanted to do in the estate. And we had a 5-year plan. It took 10 years to realise that. And when I tell you all those years ago, the one thing we wanted was a football pitch, so that youngsters could just kick a ball about. And we couldn't get it. We got the football pitch 40 years after we wanted it. And you know, there's still a lot of families out there who are suffering in that way. And you know, when I became involved in community and became involved in the Troubles, I began to look at different things that possibly could do. I mean, one of the things, when the mill closed, I thought my life had ended, because I'd worked in the mill 38 years and I thought that was it. I was 8 months unemployed. And again, that was a lesson I had to learn, because, you know, we often talk about unemployment, but until you have been unemployed, you have no idea what it's like. And so I got the opportunity to open up a project on the Ballygamartin Road called Kern-Martin Wood Products, where we brought in young men who had been involved with the police, paramilitaries, had all been in the paramilitaries, and we brought them in and taught them a skill in making wooden furniture. We were the only place in Northern Ireland that made wooden play furniture in those days. It was a wonderful success. 4 years, orders coming in, money coming in, and the department decided to close us because we weren't a part of a school, and we had to lock it up at night because we had saws and all, and we were told that was against school principle. We couldn't lock a part of the school up, so they put us out. I often think back to that, you know, if that scheme had went on, how many people would have employed, but we moved on, and I then began to get involved in impact training, which is for young people 16 who leave school with very little qualifications. In fact, none, some and none. So we opened that up. We raised the money. We built a beautiful facility on Lanark Way. It's been a huge success. And the young people have gone through that now, go out well qualified. And again, I suppose that links into Mary Ann McCracken and apprenticeships and all that kind of thing. It's giving young people the right start in life. But as I move on, and I know I'm limited time, as I moved on, you know, I began to think about education. A group of us on the Shankill were very aware that education on the Shankill was going downhill. We had 7 nursery schools in the Shankill, which were sitting half empty. Parents just didn't put their children in the nursery school, and we endeavoured to find out why. Fortunately, we heard about a scheme where we could go to Europe and get a certain amount of money, provided it was cross-community. So we worked very, very hard with the women on the other side of the peace line, and we applied to Europe for £13 million, and we got it. And we used our £6.5 million to set up early years. In those days, very few people talked about early years. In fact, the only person I knew at that time that really spoke out about it was Hillary Clinton, and that's where my friendship goes back to Hillary. I went over to America to see her and see what they were doing. And we opened up in early years. We brought in people long-term in the area and trained them to be home visitors, not health visitors, home visitors. And many of those women went on, even went on as far as some in the Queen's and graduated. So you're moving it on. But then, of course, like any funding is finished. And I panicked. We had 90 workers. We had 3 centres and no money. And I had a friend who was connected to one of the big funders, and she said, I'll get you a year's funding, but no more. And just at that time, I was in the House of Lords, and one of the first debates I sat in the House of Lords was around Sure Start. Sure Start in England, as many of you know, Tony Blair put it in, 500 million was thrown at it. It was wrongly set up from day one and began to fail. And I remember sitting in the House of Lords the night the report came in, and everybody was getting up and saying this and that about it. So I got up and I said, I'm pleased the children of England, Scotland and Wales have the opportunity to go to Sure Start, but does the House realise Northern Ireland's being denied this? And that opened all kinds of doors. Next morning I was sent for. How dare I call the minister out on the floor of the chamber? I wasn't even aware of what I was calling anybody out. But fair play, John McFall, who's now the Lord Speaker in the House, John McFall sent for me. He was a direct rule minister, and he said to me, if you can reinvent the need, I can reinvent the money. And within 9 months, we had 19 sure starts. But to have all the 5 things they all must do, there's a lot of people that do a lot of different things, but there's 5 things they must adhere to. And today in Northern Ireland, we've actually 38 sure starts, and the Department of Education fully funds it and have come on behind it in a big way. Now, what's the value of Sure Start? The value of Sure Start is we deal with parents before the baby's born. We deal with them when they're born. We deal with them when they come into what we call our tiny tots, 2-year-old. Then they pass on into the nursery schools, and then they graduate from the nursery school and they go into they graduate into the nursery schools. And you know, I often think about that time because we were one of the first areas in Belfast that thought about children graduating a gown and a mortarboard, but we had no gowns and mortarboards. And of course, me being a big mouth, Dad said, this is what we're going to do. And then somebody said, well, what are we going to do for gowns and mortarboards? I had a friend in Derry and I phoned them and I said, could you give us any help? Yes, phone Bogside. Bogside is a room full of them. So I phoned the Bogside, no problem, come up and take what you want now. Some American had funded their whole room, that hundreds of them. We went up and got various sizes and came back down. They came to our graduation for a number of years. We went to theirs for a number of years. You know, all this nonsense about community being at each other's throats, a lot of nonsense. There's a lot of work going on there. And Sure Start, I was told by some of our city councillors it wouldn't work. Sure Start's now on the Shankill over 20 years. We're beginning to see young people now going on into further education. We're beginning to see the fruits of that. We got speech and language put in, all those kind of things. We support families. And so again, I have a feeling that Mary Ann McCracken would be very pleased with that type of work. And so Sure Start's been a big success. I want to just quickly pass on to say that, you know, during all this time, I was always very interested in the peace process. While all this was going on in Northern Ireland, and while all this good community work was going on, we had to get peace. And so, as many of you know, I helped to form the Women's Coalition. It wasn't because I believe women, you know, are women. I believe that there are men and women in the world, and they both make a contribution. But there were no women in the front of politics, and we wanted women there. And so we formed the Women's Coalition. And today, 30% of the Assembly is women, which is great, because it also gives young people the opportunity to see that there could be a future there. And I was involved in that for a long time, the Women's Coalition. I've had the opportunity to travel to America many, many times, telling the story and trying to get funds for different things that I'm involved in and other people are involved in. And you know, you've already mentioned the many honours, and I often think to myself, this can't be real. I remember the grassroots giving me I was the world grassroots diplomat. I couldn't understand what that even meant. But apparently they'd heard about integrated education and the work that we were trying to do around that. And I have to say, integrated education is my passion at the moment. We have to try and bring our community together. Now, depends where you live in Northern Ireland, it might make no difference to you, but I live in a very divided area. And we have to train young people and bring them in and educate them together. Because as I was saying earlier today, young people go to school in different schools. When they leave and go into work, immediately they're hit by the fair employment. That should start years before they ever get there. And you know, I have a number of bugbears around that, but I fundraise all over the world for integrated education. And it's my absolute pleasure to see children in schools going through that. Today we had a visit from Keir Starmer, and Keir Starmer was asking about how do we teach religion in our schools. Now I have a bit of a thing about that. I don't mind religion being taught in school, world religions. I have a bit of a problem with faith being taught. I think if you're going to be taught faith, it should be taught at home. And so I could go on and on. I mean, my life has been so full, and I've reached an age now where I can hardly believe that I'm still at it. But it's there, and you know, I'm involved in integrated education. I'm involved in the Argyll Business Centre on the Shankill. We're trying to bring employment there. We bought an old church. We hope to turn that into a training unit for hospitality. Put 120 jobs on the peace line. I'm also working with another guy who wants to put 200 jobs between the Shankill and the Falls. And so there's good work going on there, and it's nothing to do with me. It's the fact that I'm so honoured to be involved. And I'm so honoured to be here tonight. And when they rang me here to say, Mary Ann McCracken get a grip. Mary Ann McCracken might be a hero. I remember my trade union, this is John Freeman, who was our regional secretary. He was fascinated with Mary Ann's brother. And every meeting we heard something about Henry Joy at the end of the meeting. And, you know, it's wonderful when you think about people. I was thinking again today, and I want to finish with this, I was thinking today about Mary Ann McCracken and about the poorhouse. And, you know, one of my lasting memories of the late 50s, early 60s was I was coming up the Donegal Road and I met a woman I knew, and she had 3 children, and she had a loaf of bread under her arm, and she was going into the back of the city hospital, which to me then was the poorhouse. And it was Christmas Eve, and that's all she had for Christmas dinner, 1 loaf. That's not that long ago, and there are still families out there suffering. But hopefully we will push on and we'll get there eventually, where people will be treated as equals. I don't believe that you should be judged by where you're born. I believe you should be judged by what you are. And so it's been my pleasure tonight to be here and to be involved in such a prestigious occasion. I don't believe I lived in 251, but I'm getting there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, May. As you say, you've lived a very full life, and you told us at the beginning the great hardships that you'd endured, which may be unrecognizable to some people, but it's a testament to your great strength and your great abilities that you have achieved what you have throughout this very full life that you have lived. And when you say that all these causes you're involved in have little to do with you, well, I don't believe that for a moment. I know that you are a driving force when it comes to a lot of these issues and organizations and events. And of course, every cause and every event needs a driving force.
Yep.
And you are clearly that force in respect of many of the events that we're dealing with. And Norma's a great force when it comes to the Mary Ann McCracken Foundation, because she is the driving force behind that. So my thanks to you, May, and my thanks to Norma for what you have said. Now, the floor is open to questions, and there's a chat line. And some of you may be able to see the questions. And here's a question from Catherine McWilliams, who's well known to us all here. And Catherine's question is, having heard both women's stories this evening, it's clear that they fought against a male-dominated society in their respective ways. And the question is, what can we do to ensure that we do not have another generation of women struggling for equality? Now, May, what do you say about that?
To me, the answer to that's quite simple. I mean, I travel quite extensively and speak to a huge number of women's groups throughout Northern Ireland. The trick is to get women to believe they can do it. Many women will say to me, oh, that's good, May, you could do it, but I never could do it. Of course you can do it. If I could do it, anybody could do it. And I'm sure if Mary Ann McCracken was here, she'll tell you the same thing. Women have got to believe in themselves. And if women stand aside and let men, whatever the reason, impose that inequality on them, then that's the women's own fault. When we formed the Women's Coalition, I was tired listening to women saying, when are we going to get women? When we formed the Women's Coalition, it only lasted about 5 years. Why? Because women didn't vote for it. It's as simple as that. We've got to get past this idea that I'm a woman and God help me, the world's against me. That's nonsense. Some of the most formidable people I meet are women. And I have to also say this, that some of the most progressive people I've met in my life have been men. Some of the bitchiest have been women. And we really have to get past that, you know. And if I can help any woman, I'm more than pleased. I'm more than pleased, because I remember when I needed that help.
Norma, do you want to say anything about that?
We get back to what May said, the most important thing you can give a child is an education. If you can give that child an education and talk about the different, there are lots of women today who are now in chief executive positions, who are running, you know, companies, running boards, whatever. You need to sort of show that women can do this, as May said, and give women, you young women, examples of what is possible.
Absolutely.
Tell the stories of those people and get it out there, because it is possible. And we have to stop being our own worst enemies.
Well, thank you both. Now, there's a question here from Thomas Gillen who refers to May's work in the union and asks a number of questions, but what it seems to come to is asking her to address what obstacles she may have overcome, with particular reference to the fact that some men might have shared her father's views about women in the trade unions.
Well, that's quite possible. I mean, if it's a Tom Gillen I know, that's quite possible. I've known Tom for a long number of years. When I first went into the trade union movement, and I'm on record as saying that you wouldn't have been discriminated against more than in the trade union. And for many, many years, it was a struggle. We thought getting a women's committee was the answer. It was the wrong way to go. Because once they gave us a women's committee, they didn't want to know what we wanted. Just as your own wee committee, go away and talk among yourselves. That's not what we wanted. We wanted to be part of the big picture. And so it was a constant fight. And actually, it's funny, that's where the title of my book comes from. I remember I was on the board of the ATG here for many years, and I remember they were discussing something, and I made a comment, and everybody just looked down the table and went on talking. It was as if somebody had opened the window and let the wind in. And I was so angry, I sliced the table, I said, "Watch my lips, I'm speaking." And that became the title of my book. After that, more people took me serious. But yes, I did meet some men in the trade union movement who had my father's views. What are you doing here? You're a woman, you should be blah, 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 blah. And you just laugh at that kind of ignorance, because women in Northern Ireland have made as big a impact here as any man ever had. I've known women who worked during the Troubles in the most appalling conditions. Many at the beginning, when their men were lifted during internment. Many on the Protestant side, when their men were lifted because of UDA and UVF, and they had to get on around their families. The interesting thing was, when those men come back out of jail, they didn't recognise the woman they'd left, because she had learned that there was things she could do that she didn't need him to do. And so it's all about that, and it's all about, and I say to women, it's all about believing in yourself. If you have a passion, get out there and do it. You know, but you have to believe in yourself. You have to believe you can. And yes, there are knocks many times within the trade union movement and outside. I've been intimidated. Many times I have been jokes of a very poor nature. But you know, I always come back. I would be well known for my sense of humour. So I always come back with a retort. And you know, it's a good idea just to have that answer on file. So it is.
Well, there's a question from Invisible Traffic and its founder and director, and it references human trafficking and modern slavery today. So I think this question is directed at both of you, and it's to ask, what can the foundation and individuals in a position of influence, such as Baroness Blood, do to help address this issue, that is the human trafficking issue and modern slavery today? Norma, what can the foundation do about that?
I think first of all, what we say we would do is raise the profile of Mary Ann and look at how what she fought for or against is relevant today, and human trafficking or slavery is actually very relevant today. And I think the question of invisible traffic, we need to know a bit more about the facts and figures for Northern Ireland, what is actually happening here, and then look at how we might work with them to improve things. I know that Invisible Traffic have done some great work with the Port of Larne in educating staff there how to recognise people who are being trafficked. And I think that message needs to get out and become more widespread across the place, so that we all start to realise that it is a major problem in Northern Ireland. It's not just somewhere else, it's here.
And I couldn't agree more. I mean, there are a number of charities, particularly here in Belfast, who work with this issue. And it's a very, very, very difficult issue. I remember a year ago or so working with a group who were dealing with a woman who had been raped so many times every day, and they got her a flat. They were trying to set her up with a bit of independence, and they got her a flat and a bed and all that. When they went in the next morning to see was she all right, she was lying on the floor because she'd never slept in a bed. Now, people in Northern Ireland don't believe that kind of thing happens. It does happen. And it happens in every area, I have to tell you. It's not just in certain areas. And I think it's up to women like me and Norma who have made it through that to actually say to people, if you need help, please ask, and we can support, and I can support them. They've only to ask me if I can do anything to help. Because when I was in London, we heard a lot about this, and we heard a lot about slavery and all that kind of thing, and that's still happening, you know. And people, sometimes people have a way, and I don't mean this about science, but some people have a way of saying, if you're on low wages, that's slavery. We have to actually differentiate what we actually mean by slavery and human trafficking. We have to make a difference. We have to actually say what we mean. And it is a big problem all over, big problem. And it is in Northern Ireland also. And so, as I say, there are organisations out there who will help. And if anybody can give any help, please contact.
Thank you. And another issue which features in a number of these questions is to do with education. And here's a question from Neve McGurk, who teaches in non-selective girls secondary in West Belfast. And she asked, if Mary Ann worked in the education sector today, what would she be doing to raise attainment in socially challenged areas, or what would she prioritise? So what can be done to raise?
Well, that's a difficult one. I mean, most schools have a certain set of rules they have to work by. And, you know, as I travel around, I go to quite a few schools all over on both sides of the peace line here. And I find, you know, there was a big talk recently about underachievement in education and the Protestant side. And I mean, I just laugh. We've been talking about underachievement for the last 30 years. And it's not necessarily just on the Protestant side. In fact, I have many, many emails from people in West Belfast saying, please, would you mention our name because we have as much underachievement here. You know, the thing we have to do is we have to work, and well, I would like to see them all go integrate. That's not what I mean. We have to work to get children to a stage where education becomes the big thing for them. And they value that education because, as I said earlier, you know, education is our passport. When a child's born, the first day it's born, it's equal. Second day, that goes. We have to work on that. But also, when a child's born, excuse me, parents would love to grant it health. That's not in a parent's gift, health. But education is, and we have to get that through, particularly young parents today, and say to them, the best thing you can do for your child is get them a first-class education. Now, I don't mean by that passing the selective and going to grad. I don't mean that. I mean, whatever that child wants to do, we have to work on that. And that's what we attempt to do through Integrate. We attempt, because we're all ability, we attempt to give children of all abilities the opportunity to be educated together and to get a first-class education. But it is a big one. It is a big one.
What we've been looking at in the foundation, in fact, what we've done is we've provided bursaries for kids going into further education in universities, bursaries to help them through their courses. But what we're now looking at is what can we do in some of the schools that we're involved with as well to help them get through from, you know, that middle level when so many want to leave school at 14, 15, don't want to do anything else, is to get them over that hump and say, there is something more you can do. So give them that financial help, whether it's to buy the books, buy the computer, buy the uniform, so that they can stay on at school and actually achieve what they want to achieve.
Well, one of the things we're doing, it's much earlier in this lady's talking about, but Dolly Parton pushed tremendous money into children reading books, and all over Northern Ireland we have Dolly Parton libraries. And when the day a child's born till it's 5, it gets a new book every month. So when that child becomes 5, it has a whole library, and they're locked into reading. So there's a whole lot of things we can do there, and there's a whole lot of things we can move on and do. For a long time, when I was working in the early years, the whole thing then was teenage pregnancy. And I mean, we had schools demented. What were they going to do? Both Protestant and Catholic. I remember some of the nuns over in St. Dominic sending for me and saying, we have this problem, what can we do? And you know, you work through that. You support that young woman for as long as she can stay at school, support her when she's having her exams, and support her afterwards. So it's just not the end of her world. And that has changed now. And we now find that young women, particularly on both sides, are choosing an education before having baby, which is a complete turnaround. But it's going to take a lot longer than 4 or 5 years, because that's something we have to really, really work on.
I've heard it said on occasions that when one's looking at this issue of disadvantage in education, that it is a generational thing, that when you find it, you may find that the parents of the child concerned have themselves been educationally disadvantaged, so that sometimes the encouragement has to go not only to the child in concern, but to the family.
Oh yes, you have to support you have to support the family. And you know, one of the things, you know, during the Troubles and that, many children fell through this loop because their father was involved in the paramilitaries on either side. And I remember being at a big conference around education, and one of the principals said, "It's all right for all this talk, but in my school it's a matter of genes." And I said, "What do you mean? Should they all wear school uniforms?" But he wasn't talking about that. And he looked at me and said, "Stunning." But there was that thinking. There was that thinking, you know, because your father or mother's involved in the paramilitaries, well, you couldn't be any good. And I have to say, unfortunately, it breaks my heart. A lot of violence is still being taught at home. And you see that particularly on the streets sometimes. Young people now, you know, they just express themselves that way and express themselves with bad language and all. I mean, when I was young, if you'd used bad, my mother would have murdered you. But not now. That's the way they're taught. We have to change all that. And working with the parents is one of the hardest things. Working with fathers. I remember we started a fathering program, and one of the things we done was we give every child in the primary schools on the Shankill a little throwaway camera, and they had a recorded day with their parents, with their father, and we put it in the little book. My dad says, and it stays with me. One of the pictures in it is the father and the wee girl are sitting at the computer. And the strap line is, "I taught my daddy to use the mouse, he's still trying to catch it." You know, so yes. You make a fun thing of it, but that stays in the child's mind. And I notice now, as I see kids now 2, 3 and 4, I have a young niece, she could sail Ireland, you know, and that's all because her parents were taking a big interest in her education and, you know, and really, really study with her and all that kind of thing, you know. So, you know, it's a long journey, but we'll get there.
Can I ask you a question? Do you think that's changed over generations? Because I'm from a working class family in Ballymena, but my parents always wanted for me what they never had was a really good education. And you know, my mum left school at 14, but they had brains to burn. But okay, my father eventually ran a business.
But you were lucky, Norma, because many parents, many young parents, if a child doesn't make any progress, they're quite happy because it means they don't have to go to the school and challenge the teacher and all that. So that suits them. You know, and I remember some years ago a parent coming to me and she had her son's record for the year. She says, "Isn't that great, May? Look, he attended 33 days in the year." She thought it was great. 33 days. But there's that thinking, don't let the child get ahead of you. You know, because if you bring home homework, I don't understand it. And that's changing. That's changing. Thank God for it. And you know, all that kind of thing. And on the computer and all, that's all changing now. And I think it'll take another generation before we'll actually see much of that change really take place.
Well, there's a question there again, it's directed at your interest in integrated education. And the question is asking why you think so many of our politicians are opposed to integrated education.
Well, I have to say this week in Stormont, the Alliance Party put in a bill around integrated education. And if anybody has the opportunity to get the whole of Hansard, it makes very interesting reading. You know, some of the things that's been said about integrated education, I cannot believe educated people are saying it. And on the other hand, I mean, one particular instance, one guy says, "Oh, no, there's no need for it." But we have a smashingly integrated school in our area. You know, and I remember some years ago having a word with the Presbyterian moderator. And we just opened up an integrated school, and I said to him, "Would you visit?" He says, "No, I wouldn't set foot in an integrated school." And I says, "You don't see that as sectarianism?" No. But many of our politicians know this is the way forward, but they have to hold on. If children get together and work together and learn there's no difference, what will happen to their vote? And that's what it's all about, you know. But that's changing. And if you get lucky enough to get the whole of Hansard, I think it was Wednesday night, last night, I think, or Tuesday night. If you get the hold of it, it makes an interesting read, because even Jim Alistair was saying, you know, he wouldn't be for integrated, but the best school in Northern Ireland is Dunradley, but it's an integrated school. You know, but our politicians are opposed to it because I just think it's something they didn't think of, and they don't like anybody else to think of it, you know. So, but we're getting there. Integrated education has taken off. We can't keep up the demand. And in 2015, the Fresh Start Agreement put 500 million into integrated and shared education, and we've got 320 million, and that's for most of our schools are on temporary premises, and that's to build new schools. And we built 3 this year. We hope to build 9 next year. But I was at a school today which started with 28 children, and today there's 450. They haven't even room to put in paper towels. And we're getting them, they're moving to a new building, not a new school, but a new building that's been derelict for a while. So I can understand people being hesitant. I have to say, when I first came into integrated education, I really believed it was for middle class, well-to-do people who could afford to have that choice. And one of the first things I was asked to do when I got the title was to do the prize giving in Hazelwood. And when I went along, I seen kids from North Belfast, from Sand. I couldn't believe it. We're actually working, and I was sold on. I was sold on. And the more I see of it, and we fundraise, that's the problem. We can't keep up the fundraising because we have to raise all our own money. We get no money from the government to do, and there's a whole legal procedure around transforming and all that. We're very, very fortunate to have people who support us, like Elaine Neeson, who made us a wonderful video, Integrate Now. You know, so we're getting there, so we are, but it has been a long journey. But again, now Lagan's 40 years old this year, 40 years. Lagan started again with 28 children who had to be escorted to school by armed police. And today there's nearly 3,000 children go to Lagan. They can't take any more. So, you know, no matter what our politicians think.
I think I can remember that, the beginnings of that, and Basil McIver, who I knew as a lawyer, was
that's right. Basil was
to the fore in promoting integrated education.
Absolutely. And there's nothing to fear from integrated. I mean, kids get the same really rounded education. They all have to stick to the same curriculum. And today we were asked about religion and faith and how you go about that. It's quite simple because the RE is part of the curriculum, and that's taught. And if a child has to be Catholic children, they're taken aside, they're taught their sacraments, Protestants. But what we do with our schools is, for instance, coming up to Christmas, the school in that area would visit every one of the 4 churches, not just one, but every one of the 4. And that lets young people see this myth. Now, that's not to say when they get to the age that they can leave, they'll go to church. Because, you know, I often say, and I get into trouble for this, but I often say, you know, whatever the churches are teaching, it's not working. Because church attendance, I mean, I'm a Presbyterian, and we would be lucky, very lucky, if we'd 40 going on a Sunday morning. So there's something missing. I can remember a time when you would have had to leave the house at 11 o'clock to make sure you got a seat. Not now. So whatever they're teaching, same on the Catholic side. In Polglass, there's only 4% goes to Mass in Polglass. It's one of the largest housing estates in Northern Ireland. It's only 4% go to Mass. So whatever's, it's not working. Anyway, that's me.
Well, many of the comments here are to say what an inspiration you are, May.
Oh, yeah.
And I know you've heard all this before.
It's okay, just send the checks.
Well, if you'd send them to the Charitable Society, please. But one final comment, because I'm going to have to close the discussion, but Claire McMahon's wondering about the next century. So I'm going to frame that into a question about what is the greatest disadvantage which today needs to be addressed. So, you're on the spot now, Norma. What do you think is the most formidable issue that you will have to face when you move forward with your foundation? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I give May a moment to think about that.
Well, if we don't hurry up and do something about climate change, we won't be here in the next century, is actually what I think. But it's back to the human trafficking again. You know, I said glibly, you know, we don't say anything about the environment, but we treat people in the most awful way. There's something has to be done to make sure that there is equality in the future and that we're not continuing this mess that we're in.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the biggest thing facing is climate change. And it's like everything else. You either take it seriously, you just believe it's a myth. Somebody's made it up. Possibly Basil, our Prime Minister, he gets to blame everything up. But, you know, who knows? I mean, 100 years ago, when Mary McCracken was about, things were totally different than they are, even in my lifetime. I mean, I can remember a time on television was a wow. And when I went into the House of Lords first, you don't get an office, you have to put your name down for an office. There's such a huge waiting list, but they will give you a laptop computer. And I said, well, they don't give me one, because I wouldn't know how to plug it in. Now, I mean, I was over 60 and I'd never plugged a laptop in. And anyway, they gave you training. And I remember she gave me this laptop and showed me how to just go home and practice. And I brought it home, put it all together, and it wouldn't come on. And I thought I broke it and took it back. And I said, I think I broke that. Jeez, that's impossible. I hadn't switched it on. Now 20 years on, I couldn't do without it. I just couldn't do without it. I never believed I would get to that stage. So things are moving at such a fast pace. And all this business of speaking to each other on social media, I don't understand all that, but I don't have to at my age. It's great. But young people will use that as a way in the future, and it will go on and on and on, you know. But who knows, 100 years time, who knows what will happen. Maybe we'll get the end of Brexit by 100 years.
Well, Brexit has to find a place everywhere. And on that note, I'm going to conclude proceedings. Thank you to all our audience. Thank you to Norma. Thank you to May for their contributions. And for those of you who wish to know more about the Society and the Foundation, please visit the site Mary Ann McCracken Foundation.org. And as May can't now do without her computer, she'll be able to do that too.
Yeah.
And mentioning the laptops, your donations would be very welcome to the Society for the good work that it does, providing for the disadvantaged. And when the pandemic broke out, Zoom learning came into vogue, and the Society, within days of that, met the needs of 5 local schools by raising the funds for 250 laptops to be provided to the local schools, so that the children who did not have laptops at home could join in the lessons that were being provided through the Zoom system. So your donations, which will be welcome, are going to serve that kind of need for the disadvantaged. The Society also funds very close by a family hub, which serves to provide assistance to families in distress and need, and who require help with whatever kind of problems single parents may endure with children. And the focus is really on the children. That's another example of the sort of things they're doing. The Society provides bursaries for the disadvantaged in 3rd level education. They support the University of Ulster, which is now building its new campus just outside this building, and we see it develop all the time. So those are the sorts of things that are being done. And of course, in these times, contributions to charitable causes have fallen, but the Society still needs funds to promote the various things to which it is committed. And in order to do that, the Foundation will be holding a series of events, and we hope that you can subscribe to those. The biography of Mary Ann McCracken was republished in 2019 by the Irish Academic Press on behalf of the Belfast Charitable Society. The new introduction was written by Mary Ann Elliott, who's an historian, now retired and living in England, but she was in the history department of Queen's for many years, and she has written the new foreword to the book, and she has signed it. And I'm presenting this signed copy, indeed, with a little bag from Clifton House.
Oh, thank you
To
very much.
Baroness
Thank you.
Blood for, with thanks for her contribution
Thank you, it's lovely.
this evening.
Thank you.
I want to say a thank you to the staff who are present,
Yeah.
to Paul, who's the Chief Executive, and Aaron, who's the archivist, who are in the wings here making all this work. To everybody, thank you for your presence and good night.